here. I'm happy to be a part of Kansas City, and I've come to really find peace and embrace my place in the world and my role in the universe. And I think, aside from maybe, the miracle of life itself, peace of mind is the greatest miracle of all,
Yeah.
Kansas City is not lacking in the arts and culture department. We don't have art critics the way that we used to.
Interesting. Can you talk about the role of an art critic in shaping the
Sure.
arts community?
Well, actual critical dialogue is not, art crit is not what it used to be.
Hmm.
Nowadays, it's more of, it's more just like traditional arts focused journalism. The role of a critic used to be to, they brought with them this very specific subset of expertise, and they were called upon to critically evaluate and analyze and neutrally articulate the ebb and flow of an art of art and of an artist's practice, and what they saw as a broader movement in both at the micro and the macro levels. And that's kind of been I don't want to say kind of like homogenized in a way, but it's definitely been a little bit. This is gonna sound bad too, but maybe a little bit watered down.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is that people just are not. Most people don't know about art. Most people, even art, people who are fond of the arts, are not knee deep in like art theory and art history.
Right.
And that's in part just a reflection of the times, and also of the fact that I think as a society and as Western civilization goes, people are not reading as much. And that's also why, back in the 19th century, poets could make a living writing.
Because people read
And
what they wrote.
Today it's you wind up working as like a deli clerk or something.
Nationally, Kansas City's not getting sort of the same respect as a Nashville, as an Atlanta, as a Chicago. Like, what do we need to get there?
Well, I don't know that we want it.
Interesting.
Because if you see what happened to New York and Austin and San Francisco and Chicago, and one of the great beauties, one of the great gems that makes Kansas City, is that it's still very affordable. And artists, or it's been prices to live, cost of living has gone up in recent years, but artists tend to go where it's inexpensive because artists are artists.
Right.
And a lot of scenes get overdeveloped, and they get too much attention, and then people flock, and then it kind of loses a bit of its, in some cases, some of its authenticity and some of its pathos. It's I think Kansas City is respected because I have friends elsewhere in the country that routinely mention to me about how they have friends who are moving here from Austin to pursue, a career in stand-up. And we have no shortage of things that are putting Kansas City on the global map with the World Cup and having all these Patrick Mahomes. And, well, even prior to that, I mean, we had 2 back-to-back World Series, runs.
Yeah.
Winning one of them and coming pretty darn close, I think, in the first one. And we've also attracted, we've also gotten a fair amount of attention, and I know Tech is making an appearance, here.
Someone explained it to me that Austin's the new New York City and Kansas City's the new Austin.
I could see that.
Yeah.
I could see that, and I'm okay with that. Austin produced a lot of cool people.
Yeah.
You know Daniel Johnston, the musician? He's
probably not the right one.
Yeah, okay, you should look him up.
Okay.
He's a great musician. He's passed away a couple years ago, but Austin produced a lot of cool stuff. I hope that we're never as big as New York City, just because I think that kind of uh, attention would be overwhelming and would undermine, I think, the authenticity that Kansas City has, and Kansas City is not lacking in authenticity.
Yeah.
And the artists here are still have so much, I think, pull, not just creatively and in terms of artistic freedom, but also in terms of influence on policy
Yeah.
and influence in the community. That if we got to be too big, we wouldn't be as able or capable of initiating or enacting, these kinds of phenomenal changes within the community, and these kinds of burgeoning and flourishing organizations like Heartland, for instance.
Yeah.
I don't. I think they'd be stifled by competition and by just by overdevelopment and by and I think a lot of it would be saturated by the pursuit of profit over the richness and the beauty of creating.
Like, I want to pivot a bit to the tech side of the conversation. We mentioned
Sure.
Austin, we mentioned tech stuff coming here, and you have a bit of a background with the artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Give like a 2 sentence for the viewers.
Yeah.
A bit of pretext about the artificial intelligence conversation.
Yeah. What my work on it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I worked as a linguist in the alignment and safety team as a contractor on the GPT-3 iterations up through ChatGPT. I left before GPT-4, working for OpenAI.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So as a writer, what do we need to
Be afraid of?
but also as artists, I think it was very surprising to see that like, oh, the first thing getting outsourced by artificial intelligence is screenwriters, and it's like, yo, it was supposed to be like automation was supposed to hit the artist last, and we're getting hit first.
And it's also well, that's a very apt and accurate analysis. Yeah, I mean, and fundamentally, what is it that makes humans humans? It's if you look at our DNA and our biology, we're very, very similar to I think was it chimpanzees.
Yeah.
It's language and it's art. And
Yeah.
It's a self-reflective capability to going back to the Philippines or the south of France on the walls of the caves, and it's our the evolution of linguistic complexity. But I don't know that I necessarily. I mean, I definitely see the displacement as a bad thing.
Yeah.
But for the record, I feel like I just worked on the Manhattan Project. I feel like I feel like Oppenheimer running to the White House after the fact, begging Harry Truman. That's a bad joke, but anyway, it's it's definitely an extension of our own creative capabilities and intellectual capabilities and linguistic capabilities that we created it to begin with, because it did not create itself.
Right.
And as for the displacement, I mean, I was a part of a study with the Writers Guild, done by University of British Columbia and Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Harvard Business School. They wanted to get a gauge kind of where writers were in like negotiations and like what their expectations were, what they thought was going to happen with pertaining both to the strikes and to AI. But I think I'm not one who believes in the AI utopia. I'm thoroughly not defeated, but dispirited by the idea of this something that is so uniquely human and humane being replaced by what is essentially just a series of complex networks and servers and algorithms in kind of a basically just a bullshit generator.
Yeah.
There's no soul behind it. There's no living, breathing biological organism behind it, and that's not human and that's not humane.
Yeah.
And I work in electronic arts as well, but I think it's important that we take a step back and understand that new is not synonymous with progress, and that art and the creative capacity is something that makes humans humans, and to lose that through this pursuit of wealth and profit and innovation, which is not always innovation, because so much innovation that is now needed is just innovation to offset previous innovation with the ecological stuff.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily mean improvement. And I think if you're going to bet on humanity, if you want to be right, you should bet on humanity being wrong. You know, because that's just the human history, the litany of human history. But you know, you can't. It's not going to slow down. It's but at the same time, you know, math teachers and professors are saying the same things about calculators.
Right.
The same thing happened in chess. And what it's actually done has created better chess players and better mathematicians.
Yeah.
And I don't know that this is going to render English and linguistics majors obsolete. You may need more of them, and they may just become better at what they do. So I remain, you know, a perennial and genuine optimist in that regard. But I am thoroughly not proud of myself for having been affiliated with it, and I am very skeptical of the AI utopia.
Yeah. Something I've been playing around with, thinking about, is like we have this concept of artificial intelligence, and it's that same sort of like painting by numbers philosophy when it comes to that. But I'm like, what is like artificial creativity? Is that even real? Like, how is there creativity behind that, or is that sort of what you're speaking to, where like it lacks the soul and it's just like, here's all this data input and
well,
that's
definitely a philosophical question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more of an input output, you know, a scenario, but you know, I guess, you know, a counterpoint to that would be, what is that one that I don't want to mention, but that is relevant nonetheless, is how is that different from a human, you know, with input output, you know, except that humans are biological organisms, and they have hearts and they have minds and they have brains and they have bodies and they have, you know, souls and all that. And machines and computers and robotics and mechatronics and all of those things are not biological organisms. They don't live and breathe. They don't really experience the way that we experience, at least not yet. There is no. It's not iRobot at the moment. It's very much just kind of a novelty currently, and I think that my hope would be that no matter what, we never lose the human touch, because I don't believe there's anything as rich or fulfilling or human or healing as human affection, or as human artistry. And that's something that's been a cornerstone of our collective in common humanity, going back to the dawn of civilization.
Right. Do you have any of your writing that you'd be willing to share?
Oh, geez. Well, my memory's a little shot, but I have something on my phone. Yeah, sure. Let me see here. This was written in 2020 during the lockdowns.
Okay.
You know, and you know, I think this is a very classy poem, and it's certainly one that speaks to, I think, the last century, and it's kind of a lament in a way, and it's also applicable to our current period of time. The downtrodden, the homeless, the hungry, the jailed, the jobless, the abused ones and the abusers who lost their way, and those who are afflicted with illness, not just the ones who are obscure, not just behind an N95 mask, but also a social invisibility. And those who are suffering reside, the haughty, the royal, the self-important. Know that the king doesn't look at your gilded houses, sidewalks lined with all sorts of shining symbols. The king will be like, I took a visiting Zen Bengali monk in Kansas as a roommate and let him live with me for 4 months. And the people actually wept. They wept because a stranger had actually acknowledged their humanity. When is the last time they truly acknowledged the world's humanity? Our being sequestered shouldn't hinder us from trying, or being filled with soulful guts of grace and gold, twixt like gilded star lilies lining our streets like Christmas lights. Dear the people who look away, 2/3 of the world, 70, 80, 85% of the world crying out for help. Maybe you went somewhere and someone shoved a note into your hand that said, free me, free me, free me, or I am in need. Find them a home, at least inside your empathic heart, you beautiful children of flowers, and then perhaps the king will attend them to this beautiful, radiant, collective humanity.
I recently saw graffiti on the window is that's the writing that comes up in the Google search. So you want to talk a bit about?
Oh, geez, there's I don't know what comes up. Graffiti on the window. The history of it, or what?
Yeah, I mean, talk about as a writer. You're being in Kansas City. I know that also got some recognition, and you've gotten some recognition. So just talk about sort of the process of creating that, and also how it's been received, and now it seems like come back to the forefront a little bit in Kansas City.
Well, that book was written between the ages of about 15 and 25, so that was some time ago. It was first published, self-published actually, over on Minnesota Avenue by Min Avenue Printing in KCK. And that was written during a very fertile period and mossy period for me creatively. It's divided into two segments. The first segment is very raw, and the second portion of that book is, I think, a bit richer and satiating and satisfying to those who want more refined ethos into what it is that they're reading. But it's certainly made the rounds, I think, in Kansas City circles, in the kind of underground literary world, and
yes.
It's been I think it's on a streaming platform now as well, streaming service. So it's been, yeah, and it's gotten some attention for kind of the both the satirical and kind of the provocative nature of the content, as well as the emphasis on oftentimes the blending, synthesizing kind of these seemingly disparate elements in literature and in art, whether it be Dadaism or surrealism or modernism. It's kind of like, I've had it, the way that I kind of describe it to people is it's kind of like taking postmodernism and modernism and romanticism, and having it be refracted through broken glass.
Translate that a little bit for us.
Okay, so
because I'm familiar with sort of the visual art language
sure.
that. So how does that translate?
Well, the Romantics were definitely they definitely had this. They were definitely motivated by beauty, truth, inspiration, the kind of transcendental, and this in love and passion. The big themes, and what we would now kind of define as being like, say, like the John Keats of the world, the Lord Byrons, the Percy Shelleys, and to a lesser extent maybe radical politics, political liberalism, which had sure, Shelley, for instance, had a profound influence on everyone from Bertrand Russell to I believe Noam Chomsky, and anyway, there's this. I feel like a simple way to summarize all of that is to say that even in postmodernity, and even in the kind of struggles that we've seen over the last century and a half, I still find the big themes, and I still find this transcendental quality being refracted through broken glass, and even as the glass gets more and more shattered with continual chaos and with continual divisiveness, and with division, and in some manner or form lunacy or disorder or disarray. There's always that the big themes, love and transcendentalism, and passion, and profound desire for a higher meaning and a higher purpose that will always shine through, no matter how shattered the glass becomes. And the book was actually written during a very intense manic episode, or certain portions of the book. And at the time, I thought that I had united quantum electrodynamics with gravity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Casual stuff.
Casual stuff, yeah. But anyways, it turned out to be a little more than a Czechoslovakian pronoun. But I can laugh about it now.
Yeah.
It's but at the time, I was like emailing, Barack Obama, and I was like the CIA, and I sent letters to like Alan Adams at MIT, and
wow.
Hacked into John Nash's voicemail box at Princeton. I was like, we've solved we took out a loan from a bank and told the banker that I needed a plane ticket to go to Georgetown to discuss a supranational non-monetary equilibrium with Michael Eric Dyson and John Nash. And we had the unified field theory. He offered to give me a ride to the airport.
Wow.
Yeah. Well,
wow. Congratulations.
Yeah. Of course, then I came back, a couple months later, and with like a tinfoil hat on my head, and I don't think he took me as seriously, but neither here nor there. But it's all good,
Yeah.
It's but yeah, the book is it's I like to think that it's kind of like the literary equivalent as of a lot of like Bad Brains or punk rock, or the kind of like the PMA, or Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. Kind of like there's something in it for everyone that offers not only visceral catharsis, but also a constructive path forward.
Got it. So hearing that, it makes me reflect. So when I was a senior in high school, the only two classes I got A's in were my speech and debate class and my physics class.
Okay.
And so I've also been someone who's balanced like this artsy creative side with like this weird profound interest in like hard science, like really into it. And I haven't met a lot of other people like that too. And so now, as you've gone forward in life, how do you balance those sides of your brain, like processing the world through an informed background in both the arts. You reference all these literary greats, but
Sure.
also you're very familiar with these high concept fields of science. So what's going on in your brain when
I don't know that balance is the right word. I don't know that I do balance them, but it's, and I think there's a certain sense of otherness for me being kind of on the periphery of so many different fields, not just locally but regionally and in some domains nationally. Whether it be with the machine learning stuff or whether
yeah,
it be mathematics or chess or regional journalism, the poetry world, the art world. And I've definitely struggled to in full in the spirit of being completely candid. Uh, I've definitely struggled some to make peace with being something of a pariah amongst pariahs and being kind of accepting my kind of my unconventional place in the world. But many great artists were either like in say New York City, where I know your background.
yeah,
Many great outsider artists would live under bridges and stuff to just to be able to create.
yeah,
And I'm also, of course, reminded of one of my, I don't know if heroes is the right word, but somebody who has definitely informed some of what I do, Marcel Duchamp.
okay,
And he was an individual that kind of, blended a lot of disparate elements. And it's like, was he a painter and a sculptor? Well, that's kind of how he started. But when you go further along, it's kind of like, well, he was a guy who just created a lot of interesting things.
yeah,
And he also got into chess and writing and literature and absurdism and
yeah,
so many different things, and was very fond of physics and mathematics and if you go back even further, to the Renaissance, look at Michelangelo, look at Raphael, look at Da Vinci. They weren't just painters; they were architects, they were engineers, they were scientists, botanists, sculptors.
yeah,
And it's also true on the science side. If you look at Nikola Tesla, he was not just an electrical engineer, he was a futurist, he was a philosopher, he was a linguist, he was a writer, um, he was an inventor, and I don't see a categorical distinction between art and science the way most people do.
mm,
I view one as a form, one both as science is an art form, art is an art, science is a science, and so on and so on.
yeah, just different processes of
Different
discovery.
processes, and you put different processes, and yeah, and I can think of essentially no higher art form than the art of problem solving, which is at the crux of both art and science.
Yeah. I come from a background of a lot of writer performers, and so I don't always separate like performing artists from literary artists. But I imagine there is sort of like a community, like there are people who just write, they're not trying to
Yeah, oh, for
perform
sure.
it and act it and do
Yeah,
all that. So
yeah.
what's like the state of like the literary community here in Kansas City, and where do they
I
congregate? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's more of an emphasis in this city on the oral tradition of poetry and on spoken word that you see with like poetry for personal power, or we have no shortage of open mics
yeah,
and poetry readings and things of that nature. A lot of the more literary scene is more in the academy at this point. It's more in academia, with like BKMK Press and New Letters and UMKC and I'm affiliated with Spartan Press, which is more literary. And then there is some artistic cross pollination, but most writers are not performers, and a lot of performers do not just do strictly literary endeavors, but there's definitely overlap, going all the way back to Homer and,
Yeah.
up through, some of the jazz poets and Bob Kaufman and certainly with hip hop, but, um, I can think of a couple of more literary writers in the city who have kind of transitioned into being more spoken word. Glenn North comes to mind. Um, there are a lot of people like that in this city that started out in the performing and went to literary, or started in the literary, went to performing, or still do some measure of both.
So I'm curious, thinking of like the people who stay in Kansas City, right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of people, like, we come up here in Kansas City and it's like, all right, we gotta go to New York, we gotta go to LA,
Chicago.
Chicago,
Yep,
yeah.
yep, yep.
But who are the people, like, who are the success stories, or like who are the figureheads who have stayed in Kansas City and have really helped pour into the city, and who's here that everyone should
Oh,
know?
how much time do we have? Back for part two.
Right.
No, Jose Faust, my dear friend, has been here for quite some time, and also our mutual friend and colleague, Patrick Dobson. Jose's a muralist. I'm sure you know him, and a
Yeah.
writer. Patrick is a novelist and a memoirist and a journalist. Um, Brittany Noriega is a brilliant illustrator and visual artist, and also a community organizer and activist. Devin Edwards is a cartoonist and painter who's got about as much work ethic as anybody you'll ever meet. Um, I and you know Glenn North, um, certainly somebody in a completely unrelated field in sound design. Tom Mardikes has been here for his whole life, basically his whole life, and he's transformed the sound and music scene, and had been the chair of the theater department at UMKC since like the 1980s. But although I don't think he still holds that position currently. Um, Sherry Hall, Jen Harris. These are all people who have really stayed in Kansas City and made it, a really a mecca of the arts world. J.T. Daniels.
I see his murals everywhere.
Yeah, Psych Style, Scribe. There are really a lot in the visual arts, especially.
Yeah.
Literature, I found that literature and spoken word, I found that people tend to kind of come and go. And certainly actors tend to come and go. John Rensenhouse and the Kansas City Actors Theater is another organization that comes to mind that has become a perennial fixture here since about 2004. There's certainly the Kansas City Underground Film Festival, which brings in international audiences to Charlotte Street, annually. I mean, Kansas City is not lacking in the arts and culture department.
So shrinking the scope a little bit, being informed by all these different worldviews, calling Kansas City home.
For sure, yeah.
A lot of conversations I've had is that the Kansas City culture, Kansas City community is a bit fractured. Like, the theater people are over here, the poets are over here, the comedians are over here, and as a journalist, talk about how you interact with the different arts and the different cultures that are here in Kansas City.
Sure. Well, one thing that I noticed when I moved here when I was 19. I'm 34 now, and coming from a journalism background, on a related note, I just one of the first things that I noticed coming from the East Coast and the Southwest and the Mid-Atlantic, one of the first things I noticed was just still how segregated this area really is. And I feel like the arts are kind of still in the different disciplines, as you mentioned. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I have an answer for how you would necessarily finesse them together, because they are fundamentally different practices. But the I think I've definitely seen, a lot of organizations try to bring together different disciplines and create, say, art shows or programming or events that are united by a common theme or a motif or whatever. And that doesn't self-limit based on the discipline, and that's something that I see a lot of at, like, say, Interurban Art House.
Got it.
They do so much of that over in downtown Overland Park. In Kansas City, I do think it's still, people are still kind of in their own little niche.
Yeah.
I think the visual artists are all very tight there, but I will say that I have a fair amount of mobility as an arts writer and as a journalist, that I can kind of go between, and so it's I see it as being, I see that kind of a self-isolating aspect that you reference, but at the same time, it's also less apparent to me, just because I'm constantly circulating.
Yeah.
And I'm optimistic, and I'm optimistic about the future.
You're a room full of optimists.
Yeah, despite some of the setbacks of recent years, and kind of some of the very real, heartache and that we've seen, I still remain very optimistic.